This is assignment 2.2, how the body recovers from steady state exercise, and my name is Joey Webber. Firstly, I will be explaining to you the cardiovascular responses to steady state exercise. What is steady state exercise? When you partake in physical exercise, there is a stage that your body will reach where the consumption of oxygen matches that of the demand. This is known as steady state exercise. This does not happen immediately, and your body takes time to reach its plateau. A steady state will only occur in submaximal activities. For example, Mo Farah running a 500-meter race is an example of a steady state. When you begin to exercise, there is a dramatic increase in the demand for oxygen from the muscles in the body. The body will then adjust to this level of oxygen required and will reach a steady state. Heart rate. If you were performing a 20-minute run, there would be various stages at which your heart rate would change. Minutes before you start the run, there would be an anticipatory rise in your heart rate. Then, in the first 2 to 3 minutes of your exercise, there will be a significant increase in the heart rate because the body is adjusting to the level of oxygen that is required to the working muscles. Your body's heart rate will then plateau as the body has adjusted to the levels of oxygen required, and your heart rate will level out. Once you have finished your 20-minute run, the heart rate will slowly start to decrease because the body is still having to repay oxygen debt to the working muscles. An average person's heart rate is 70 beats per minute, and an elite athlete's heart rate is 40 beats per minute. The average person's heart rate is lower than the elite athlete's heart rate because the elite athlete's heart is more efficient at supplying oxygen to the muscles, so therefore needs to beat less times. Stroke volume. Stroke volume is the amount of blood that leaves the heart via the left ventricle of the heart. The average stroke volume for an adult is 50 to 70 milliliters at rest, and 110 to 130 at rest of an elite athlete such as Mo Farah, and 150 ml during exercise. During exercise, your stroke volume will reach a peak during submaximal exercise and can't increase any further. Factors affecting stroke volume. One factor that can increase your stroke volume is your venous return. Venous return is when deoxygenated blood returns to the heart via veins. Your veins contain pocket valves which prevent backflow and keep the blood flowing in one direction. Veins are located in between skeletal muscles, and when they contact, they help squeeze the blood along and back to the heart. This is known as a muscle pump. When you are exercising, your breaths will become deeper and faster, causing the pressure within the thorax to fluctuate, which helps to squeeze the veins to force blood back to the heart. This process is known as a respiratory pump. Therefore, there is now an increase in the venous return, which will then cause an increase in stroke volume. Starling's law. Starling's law suggests that stroke volume can increase due to the filling of blood in the heart. Therefore, your stroke volume is now dependent on venous return, and this is where deoxygized blood returns to the heart. Therefore, an increase in venous return leads to the increase in your stroke volume. Mo Farah's venous return would be greater than an average person because their muscles and respiratory pump would be much stronger and more efficient, which will lead to an increase in blood returning because more blood can be pumped during one beat. Cardiac output. Cardiac output is the amount of blood that is pumped out of the heart every minute. Cardiac output is also known as Q. The average cardiac output is 5 litres per minute and can reach between 40 to 20 litres per minute during exercise. Mo Farah's cardiac output can reach up to 40 litres per minute during exercise. This is because his heart is more efficient and stronger, so can pump more blood out per minute than an average person. When you are exercising, your cardiac output begins to increase quite rapidly due to there being an oxygen deficiency in the body. Also, carbon dioxide needs to be removed from the body. This means that more blood needs to be pumped around the body to remove carbon dioxide and deliver oxygen to the muscles. It will then plateau during steady state exercise and decrease to deal with oxygen debt. Blood pressure. Blood pressure is the force exerted against walls of the arteries by blood. When you are measuring blood pressure, it is split into two. Systolic and diastolic pressure. Systolic pressure is the force of the blood against arteries when leaving the heart. Diastolic pressure is the force of the blood against the blood vessels when returning to the heart. When you measure your blood pressure, it is measured in mmHg, with systolic blood pressure on the top and diastolic blood pressure on the bottom. The average blood pressure is 120 to 80 mmGh. When you exercise, your systolic pressure increases because the blood being pumped needs to be needs to be faster to supply working muscles with oxygen. Diastolic pressure remains the same as or decreases because the body is being pumped out of the heart too fast compared to the blood coming back in. An increase in cardiac output and stroke volume will lead to an increase in blood pressure as more blood is leaving the heart. Blood flow. Your vascular shunt refers to the distribution of blood around the body. When you start to exercise, the vascular system redistributes blood to areas of the body that have the greatest demand for oxygen away from the areas without the lower demand for oxygen. For example, if you are doing a 20-minute run, blood will be distributed to the muscles and away from the organs where most of the blood is at rest. The body does this so that there is more efficiency in the working muscles as blood is flowing to them. This also helps to remove any waste products such as carbon dioxide from the body more efficiently. For athletes such as Mo Farah, their vascular shunt would become more efficient by sending even more blood to the working muscles so that more oxygen can be delivered and therefore muscles can work for even longer. Blood flow 2. Vasoconstriction is where blood vessels contract to become narrow due to constrictions of the muscular walls in the veins, which will increase blood pressure. This makes the blood flow faster and therefore there is less space to travel through. When you are exercising, the sympathetic nervous system stimulates the blood vessels in non-active tissue to constrict or narrow, reducing blood flow to those tissues. The blood flow is then redistributed to your active muscles. Vasodilation is when the blood vessels relax and expand, decreasing the pressure of the blood as there is more room for the blood to flow through. This slows the speed that the blood is traveling at to an increase in blood pressure. During exercise, the blood vessels close to the working muscles dilate so that more oxygen and nutrients can be delivered to the working muscles. Respiratory response. Breathing rate. When you exercise, one of the byproducts of muscular movement is carbon dioxide. As you exercise, your breathing rate increases so that more oxygen can enter the muscle cells and more carbon dioxide can be removed. Your breathing rate is the amount of breaths that you take per minute. At rest, the average breathing rate is between 13 to 16 breaths per minute, and during exercise it can vary between 40 to 60 breaths per minute. During steady-state exercise, your breathing rate will level out and plateau and will become constant. The reason for this is because the demand for oxygen by the muscle cells has been met by the supply of oxygen. Therefore, there is no need to increase it any further. Mo Farah's breathing rate during steady-state exercise will be about 60 beats per minute. This will allow his muscles to work for longer and at a higher intensity as he has a constant supply of oxygen to his muscles. External respiration. External respiration occurs at the respiratory membrane in the lungs, which is at the alveoli. When you breathe in, there is a high partial pressure of oxygen in the lungs. There is also a high partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the capillaries compared to the lungs. Gases diffuse from a high partial pressure to a low partial pressure, so oxygen diffuses into capillaries and carbon dioxide diffuses into capillaries and carbon dioxide diffuses into the alveoli also. Once the oxygen has diffused into the capillaries, it can bind to the hemoglobin with the red blood cells. Once this has occurred, it forms oxyhemoglobin, and this is how oxygen is transported into the blood. Internal respiration. Internal respiration occurs at the respiratory membrane in the tissue. The oxygen diffuses from the oxyhemoglobin in the capillaries and into the working muscle cells. The carbon dioxide diffuses from the working muscles and into the capillaries. Between the capillary and the muscle, the oxygen diffusion gradient is high, as is the carbon dioxide diffusion gradient. This causes oxygen to diffuse into the muscles and carbon dioxide to diffuse the capillary as gases travel down the diffusion gradient. When you exercise, you increase the diffusion gradient, causing more gases to be diffused. Tidal volume. Tidal volume is the amount of air which enters the lungs during a normal inhalation. The average tidal volume at rest is 500 milliliters. During exercise, it can increase to 2,000 to 3,000 milliliters. During exercise, carbon dioxide is produced and increasing tidal volume is one way for your lungs to accommodate the exhalation of this increased carbon dioxide concentration. Increasing the tidal volume means that your breaths become deeper so more oxygen can enter the lungs per breath. When you exercise, your tidal volume will increase rapidly to deal with the oxygen deficiency, as deeper breaths will allow more oxygen to get in. During steady-state exercise, it will level off and become constant as the supply of oxygen will meet the demand. Mo Farah can train himself to increase his tidal volume rather than their breathing rate. This is because deeper breaths allow more oxygen in compared to faster breaths, making a more efficient energy system. Oxygen dissociation. The oxygen dissociation curve shows the percentage of saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. When hemoglobin is full with oxygen, it becomes dissociated. When the oxygen unloads, it is called dissociation. Association occurs in the interface between the alveoli and the capillary, as there is a high pressure of oxygen there. Dissociation happens in the muscle cell of the capillary and interface, as there is a low pressure of oxygen. The first oxygen molecule then binds to the hemoglobin, slightly distorts it. This is the beginning of the curve. This makes it easier for the next two molecules to bind, causing the curve to become steeper. The fourth oxygen is more difficult to bind, and this causes the curve to flatten out. Oxygen dissociation 2. During steady state exercise, the dissociation curve shifts to the right of the normal curve. The shift indicates a decrease in oxygen affinity of hemoglobin, allowing more oxygen to be available to the tissue. Other factors that shift the curve to the right are increases in carbon dioxide and temperature. Increases in temperature denature the bond between oxygen and hemoglobin, which increases the amount of oxygen being released. A decrease in pH also shifts the curve to the right. For Mo-Farah, carbon dioxide production and temperature would increase further and pH would drop further due to the intensity and duration of phase activity. This would shift the curve further to the right, meaning hemoglobin are able to release the oxygen to the muscles faster. This therefore allows more oxygen to be supplied to the muscles. Respiratory controls. The respiratory control center is located in the medulla oblongata and controls breathing rate and depth. The RCC has two different centers. These are inspiratory and expiratory centers. The IC stimulates inspiratory muscles to contract at rest and during exercise. The EC stimulates additional expiratory muscles to contract during exercise but not active during rest. There are neural control factors that detect changes in the body and send signals to the centers to stimulate the muscles. Neural control factors are proprioceptors are located in the muscles, tendons and joints. These detect movement in the body. Chemoreceptors detect chemical changes in the body, such as an increase in carbon dioxide. Baroreceptors detect the stretching of the lungs and inform the RCC about the state of the lung inflation. Thermoreceptors are able to detect changes in temperature within the blood. Energy systems. The energy continuum helps to show how the energy system works together to provide ATP to resynthesize. All three energy systems work together to help provide energy for the ATP resynthesis. The first system is ATP to PC system. This gives up to 10 seconds of energy. The second system is the lactic acid system. This gives up to 3 minutes of energy. The third system is the aerobic system, which gives us much energy dependent on our food fuel. Aerobic systems. Aerobic systems. The aerobic system is the last system, and it is used as it is the system that takes the longest. This system has three stages to it. These are aerobic glycosis, the Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain. The aerobic cycle can last up to 90 minutes and produces 30 ATP molecules. The aerobic system takes place in the mitochondria of the muscle cells. This is because this system uses oxygen and aerobic respiration takes place in the mitochondria. Aerobic systems. Aerobic glycosis is the first stage and produces 2 of the 38 molecules. Glycogen from the food you eat is broken down into the glucose by the enzyme glycan 5-phosphate. The glucose is then broken down into pyruvic acid and 2 phosphate molecules. Pyruvic acid and coenzyme A then forms A-ketyl-CoA. If there is no more glycogen stored, fats can also be used. Lipase also helps to break down fatty acids into acetylcholine, which then enters the Krebs cycle. Fats can produce more energy but require 15% more O2. This is a diagram of what occurs. Aerobic systems, the Krebs cycle. This is the second stage of aerobic systems. This produces 2 phosphate molecules. This stage also takes place in the mitochondria. The acetylcholine produced from aerobic glycosis combines to the oxalic acid and forms citric acid. This then feeds into the Krebs cycle to produce 2 phosphates, hydrogen, carbon dioxide, and oxalic acid. The electron transport chain is the last stage of the aerobic systems and produces 34 phosphate molecules. The hydrogen produced from the Krebs cycle is used to bond with the 2 transport enzymes, NAD and FAD, to produce NAHD and FADH. When the NADH is sent along the transport chain, H ions are made and water. When FAAD is sent along the transport chain, H electrons are made and 34 phosphate molecules. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for watching.